The Labour Party are split on Jeremy Corbyn's response to the Russian spy poisoning in Salisbury. Yesterday, the Labour leader said the evidence points towards Russia. But in the Guardian newspaper today, he warns we should not rush way ahead of the evidence and suggests the poisoning could have been down to Russian mafia-like groups. He also questioned whether we should trust international intelligence, stating, in his words, flawed intelligence and dodgy dossiers led to the calamity of the Iraq invasion. Well, Labour's shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer was asked about this on Question Time last night. Let's take a look.
The Prime Minister asked serious questions of Russia earlier this week, based on the investigation carried out by our security and intelligence services and the work at Porton Down. And no answers have been given. No answers have been given. And that led her to the conclusion that there is no alternative explanation other than that responsibility lies with Russia. And as you will have seen, Germany, France and the US have joined her in that conclusion. And that is the right conclusion. And for that reason, I think it's very important that we support the action that the Prime Minister laid out on Wednesday.
Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit Secretary. Well, we're joined now here in the studio by Nick Thomas-Symonds, who is Labour's shadow Security Minister. Welcome to the programme.
Nice to be here.
Who do you think was responsible for the nerve agent attack?
I agree with the assessment that we've seen during the week, that the evidence absolutely is pointing towards Russia. It seems that there are two possibilities within that. It's either that the Russian state deliberately ordered it, or it is that it happened negligently, where the Russian state lost control in some way of the nerve agent.
Right. Either way, though, it's the Russian state. I mean, even if they were negligent, as you say, in terms of losing hold of that gas, it is they who are responsible.
Well, as was made clear, actually, in Jeremy Corbyn's article that was published yesterday in The Guardian, it actually sets out those two possibilities. And, of course, the second possibility, which is in terms of losing control, Jeremy raised, and I think you pointed out, Joe, at the top of the programme about involvement of Russian mafia and other organisations. That's absolutely consistent with the second of the Prime Minister's possibilities, and that's clearly what we're looking at, and the evidence is pointing towards Russia, absolutely.
Right, but why is Jeremy Corbyn equivocating in his article again? He seems to be saying that we need to hold back before we do categorically say it is the Russian state, despite the fact that there is now a coordinated response from France, from Germany, from NATO, from America, who all say the pattern is clear and there is no plausible alternative to it being the Russian state.
Well, could I just take to that? Firstly, in terms of the joint statement, that's obviously very welcome. We want to build the widest possible international coalition. And that statement's language is quite clear in terms of accepting the highly likely position that the Prime Minister set out in the House of Commons on Monday. I don't accept, though, this characterisation of equivocation. I was there in the House of Commons Monday to hear Jeremy's statement. Jeremy actually quoted verbatim what the Prime Minister said and then said afterwards that we had to have a decisive, proportionate response based on the evidence. And to me, that's entirely common sense way to proceed.
But he highlighted flawed intelligence and dodgy dossiers led to the calamity of the Iraq invasion. Why is he highlighting that at a time of national security when there has been an attack with a Cold War nerve agent on British soil?
Well, firstly, we absolutely condemn the awful events in Salisbury, and let's make clear, we back the investigation that's going on, the work of the security services, counter-terror and others, and that's very, very important that we do so. But all, if I may say so, is happening is that the Leader of the Opposition is raising some reasonable questions. We do always have to look at the lessons of the past, and the lessons of the past are simply to be considered, thoughtful how we move forward, absolutely, and that's what we should be doing as the evidence emerges. The evidence absolutely supports at the moment the measures that the government has already taken. Let's now see how the investigation proceeds and act proportionately too. There's nothing wrong with a considered approach to this.
Right, but is it a considered approach? I mean, Labour has said it supports the sanctions and it supports the expulsions. Well, if you support the expulsions, the sanctions, the punishment, and yet you're not completely clear as to who that is going to be directed at, or you don't completely trust the evidence from the security services, why are you supporting the sanctions and the expulsions?
There's no suggestion we don't support the position of the security services. There is a...
Well, there is, because you're bringing up dodgy dossiers in the Iraq war and saying that these things cannot be wholly trusted because it led to a calamity in foreign policy nearly 15 years ago. So, of course, he is making the point, Jeremy Corbyn, that that is what might have happened in this case.
No, with respect, there is a distinction between the evidence that's collected by the security service, and we absolutely support them in doing that. Of course we do. They do an excellent job. And how politicians then seek to interpret and act upon them. And there's nothing wrong with being reasonable and considered. We, of course, need to respond as the evidence emerges. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, Jo.
Is there an inconsistency here in terms of Jeremy Corbyn's article that he wrote overnight and what he said in the House and what Labour is trying to do in terms of showing its support to Theresa May?
I think there absolutely is. He's trying to say that we can't be sure that the Russian state is to blame. But as you point out, he's meanwhile saying we're back Theresa May and expelling the diplomats. And the only way you can do that is if you support the idea that the Russian state is to blame. And I think in the end it leads to questions about whose side is he on. And there's a whole history of association between the hard left and Russia and the Communist Party. And I think these moments of big national security crises are real tests of leadership. And at the moment, Jeremy Corbyn is failing that. And I think a lot of his Labour MPs agree that he's failing that.
What do you say to the Labour MPs that have questioned it? I mean, we had a number of them on this programme this week. There are MPs who feel he is not giving his full support by some of the comments that he has made, and that actually people like Keir Starmer, even Emily Thornberry, Neil Griffiths, all people on the front bench, have been much more explicit. Is there a divide now emerging in Labour?
I don't expect that, accept that characterisation. And let me just say, of course, politicians can use different language, but there is absolute unity around, first of all, the evidence points towards Russia. It absolutely does. Secondly, let's build the widest possible international coalition now to deal with it. Absolutely. Thirdly, let's act proportionately on the evidence. Three entirely reasonable positions.
Does Jeremy Corbyn welcome the US President's support for the UK and Theresa May's position?
We absolutely welcome the joint statement that has emerged. And if I just may say so, Rachel, if you look at the language of that joint statement, it accepts the highly likely position of the government. But even that isn't as definitive as perhaps Rachel was suggesting.
Well, except they do say there's no plausible alternative. So, in other words, it must be the Russian state.
And that, if I may say, sorry to cut across you, Jo, but just to say that simply how the Russians have responded is one of the things we absolutely have to take into account. And that's one of the reasons why it's proportionate at this stage to be backing the steps that the government has taken.
One of the things that Jeremy Corbyn raised earlier in the week was about money and Russian money and the fact that London and the South East has been used as a bit of a playground for the Russian elite. Jeremy Corbyn was right to question that even then, wasn't he, in the immediate aftermath of the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter?
Yes, I definitely think that there is an issue about dodgy money coming into London and money laundering going on, particularly through the property market. And I think it's absolutely right for that to be clamped down on. The government has actually said it's going to do that with these Magnitsky amendments. And I think actually that's one thing that would probably hurt Putin and his associates as much as anything else.
All right, Nick, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now,